But what I'm trying to get to is that there is our brain doesn't think in terms of muscles. Our body doesn't act in terms of individual muscles, but we've organized our anatomy books in terms of individual muscles, and that's gotten us down the wrong track. I don't expect that I'm going to be able to overturn that with, obviously it's a very useful metaphor, the origins and insertions in the action, and we've learned a lot from that metaphor, but I don't think it's actually the way the body works. And I think we're on the edge of a revolution that will understand it differently. And I think that new understanding will be much better for yoga, because I don't think the individual origin and insertion anatomy has been very useful for yoga teachers.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, where you can find a large selection of Om and yoga clothing, spiritual jewelry, and unique fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now here's your host, Ashton Szabo.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Savannah Podcast. I am really excited about our guest today. He's someone whose work has definitely impacted the way that I look at the human body. But before we dive into the conversation, I want to remind you to go over to SavannahSpirit.com/contest to enter into our weekly contest. Now, in today's show, we are going to talk about the human body, the body in movement, the importance of movement, our connective tissue, pain, disease, all of these great topics. I'm really excited to share it with you all today. Our guest today is Tom Myers, author of the trailblazing book Anatomy Transmat, which takes a whole systems view of the body through interconnected myofascial relationships. His work has influenced some of the greatest manual and movement therapists of our time and has no doubt completely changed how many people, myself included, view the body. He's been practicing bodywork for over 40 years and studied with the likes of Dr. Ida Rolf and Moshe Feldenkrais. Tom, welcome to the show.
Ashton, it's a great pleasure to be with you.
It's really exciting to have you on the show, both for the sake of our audience, but also personally, because I'm such a fan of your work. So thank you for agreeing to join us today.
Oh, you're very kind.
So tell us a little bit about your background and the work that you do.
Well, I grew up in a small town in Maine and went to school and studied English Lit. That's what you did in those days. When you didn't know what you wanted to do, you studied English Lit, and then it became media studies, and now it's international relations. So it's the refuge of people who don't know what they want to do. But I was doing a lot of acting there and really enjoyed being in the theater. But then I switched entirely. I ran into a fellow named Buckminster Fuller and just immersed myself in his whole systems kind of thinking for several years, and my actual degree is in design. And then I worked in environmental projects for several years, including an aquaculture company that I helped start here in Maine. And this was the 1970s, and America was a little bit tipped, and everything that was loose started rolling towards California, and I was one of those people who came loose in the 70s and started rolling towards California. And I ran into meditation, learning Tai Chi, what's now called New Agey stuff, but was in those days called the human potential movement. And I just took to the human potential movement like a duck to water. And having sort of gone from cult to cult and studied various forms of meditation and immersed myself in these things, I decided that bodywork was where I would end up, because it's a craft. You use it with your hand, do it with your hands. Either you get the results or you don't. So it has that kind of grounded feeling to it, as opposed to, I don't know, meditation or chakra work or something that's very, very hard to measure. And I ran into Ida Rolf, and I was just so impressed with the magic that she was able to do with her hands. So took me a couple of years. I had to go back and get a massage license and training and anatomy and physiology and kinesiology to present myself back to her as a student. But I've never looked back since then. She was absolutely my inspiration, and kept me off the streets with something useful to do. And it just took off from there. And I've studied with a lot of people, osteopaths in Europe, Judith Ashton, Emily Conrad, studied, and I think your audience is mostly yoga, and I studied a bit with Iyengar in Pune, India. But by no means am I a yoga adept or teacher, or I don't claim anything in yoga at all. But I have tried to rethink anatomy in a way that would be more useful to the yoga teacher. And that's why we present our courses for yoga teachers and really hope that they will take it up, because I think what's happening with yoga in the world is so important. And unfortunately, the level of yoga teacher training is not as high as I think it could be. And so I'm applauding all the efforts that are being made to lift the yoga teacher training up, simply so that yoga teachers can sit at the table with other people, because yoga has so much to offer the world of physical education and physical therapy and generally being embodied, which we're losing a lot of in our culture today.
I definitely want to dive into some more specific views about yoga with you. But before we get in there, one of the terms that I want to help define for people, because it is a bit of a buzzword. We hear this word fascia thrown around quite a bit these days. When you use the term fascia, or more specifically myofascia, what are you describing?
Okay, well, let's stick with the term fascia first. Okay. So this is a little bit mired in controversy, so let me try to separate out two definitions of the word fascia. The strict medical definition of the word fascia applies only to very specific parts of the connective tissue matrix that are in the human body. We say plantar fascia. It's actually the plantar aponeurosis, and fascia would apply to the crural fascia that goes outside the leg, or the fascia lata that goes outside the thigh. There are very few actual fasciae in the body. Almost everything is named something else. For instance, the thoracolumbar fascia is the latissimus aponeurosis plus other things. So I can pull out all those names, but we needed a word. The general public or the professional public needed a word to describe this fibrous matrix that we really hadn't seen as a system, which consists of the tendons, the ligaments, the fascia, the aponeuroses, all the strings and membranes that hold us together. And the word fascia has been chosen for that. And I think we just have to acknowledge that there are now two definitions for fascia, a strict medical one and a more general one. I would just point to the word stress as a similar one. Stress has a very specific meaning in medical terms, and it's not the way we use it. So we've appropriated this medical word stress into our vocabulary, and it means something different to the general public to what it means to the scientific public. So I think fascia would be that. So now let's give the generalized what everybody's talking about when they're using the word fascia. And unfortunately, as I think you kind of alluded, everybody's jumping on the word fascia now, and they're misusing it, even in its general sense. So if we say the fascial webbing, or give it some other word so that it's not that medical definition, what we're talking about is the web. It's a three-dimensional spider web of tough fibers and snotty gels that holds us together. And you couldn't put 70 trillion cells together. You're about 70 trillion cells, depending on whether you want to count the ones in your gut or not, in which case it's about twice that many. But you're about 70 trillion cells, nerve cells, muscle cells, epithelial cells, and connective tissue cells. And the connective tissue cells are secreting, kind of like snails leave a trail of slime. Your connective tissue cells are leaving trails of connective tissue, which organizes itself into your tendons, your ligaments, the fascia that's in the muscles, the fiber, the fabric. I guess I'll just stop trying to lay all this out and say fascia is biological fabric.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the old perception of this fabric, as it were, was similar to the way that someone might go and buy meat at a grocery store. It's wrapped in a plastic, and they buy it and they take it home, and then they rip open the plastic to get to the meat. That we used to think that, well, that's all this wrapping really was, or all this material really was the wrapping of our organs, and it wrapped around our muscle cells. But we're learning, in large part because of the work that you do, but that it's much more dynamic than that. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, yes. It's a very responsive system. And we just haven't seen it as a system. We've seen, okay, let's talk about what trouble you're having in your plantar fascia. What trouble are you having in your Achilles tendon? What trouble you're having in your hamstring? It is very evident when you really go in and look at the body. And I just finished 4 weeks of dissection out in Arizona. We do these classes every year, and we have people coming from all over the world to essentially do an autopsy. And the source of the word autopsy is to see for yourself. Auto meaning self, and opsy meaning to see. So when you see the body really, and not just see it in the books, you see what a ubiquitous system this fascial system is. It starts from the backing of the skin, which is very similar to a carpet backing. It's what gets turned into hide in animals. And then you go down through the fat layer, and then there is a very tough kind of Tyvek, thin but strong layer holding in everything. So if you imagine that the fascia is pulling in on your tissue, we talk about hydrating tissue, and we want to have it as hydrated as possible. But your fascia is actually squeezing in the same way you might squeeze a sponge, and squeezing some of that water out. And in fact, squeezes some of that water out every time you do, calf raises or anything where you're exercising, walking, running. Anytime you're exercising your calves, you're pushing the water around in this tissue. But the fascial fabric is kind of squeezing down on it. So it's much more than just the wrapping around the muscle. It goes through the muscle. It attaches the muscle to the bone, but we say attaching to the bone, it actually attaches to the fascia that goes around the bone. It's kind of a cling wrap, saran wrap coating that goes around the bone called the periosteum. And muscles don't attach to bones. The tendon of the muscle blends with the periosteum. That would be a more accurate way of saying it, because there's no place where the tendon stops and the periosteum begins, except you make that division with a scalpel. So the body is one continuous big net. And let me just say, in 500 years of anatomy, we have a very clear picture of the nervous system. It's been abstracted out by Alex Gray in his beautiful illustrations, or by Gunther von Hagens in his preparations of body worlds. But we have a clear idea of what the nervous system looks like. We have a very clear idea of what the circulatory system looks like. You've probably seen those things where they take the blood out and inject red latex in, and then you see the circulatory person, and you can see that the whole shape of the body is outlined in the circulatory system. But the same is true of the fascial system, and in 500 years of anatomy, we don't have a picture of the fascial system. And I just think this is a big lack. I don't think that fascia is the answer to all the problems that we have. I'm very interested in fascia because we don't know much about it. Once we know about it, and I think in 10 years, 20 years, we'll pretty much know what we need to know about it. The only thing is that we have been ignoring this system as a system for all this time. We have thought that the word musculoskeletal solved the problem, described the situation, but musculoskeletal leaves out the system that's holding the two of them together, which is this biological fabric. It not only surrounds the muscle, it impregnates the muscle. It not only surrounds the bones, it impregnates the bones. It not only surrounds the organs, it invests all the organs. So there, except for the open lumens of your lung tubes and your alimentary canal, every place inside you has some form of fascia in and around it. Otherwise, your cells would slide down your body and end up in a big pool by your feet. So you need this, just as an orange needs the cellulose to organize the juice, you need the fascia to organize your juice.
Well, and I'd say too that this is quite a different view overall than the more kind of mechanistic view of the human body. I mean, most people that you go to an anatomy training, and what you learn is you separate each muscle out, and you say, okay, well, this is the bicep, and it attaches here and inserts there, and this is its action, this is what it does. But with the understandings that you're coming through with this myofascial network, is that there's no real completely separate thing in the body, correct?
There is no really, I say that with some confidence. Again, having just come back from dissection, the thing that is the most impressive in these dissections is that there is no separate thing until you make it separate with a knife. Okay. So the anatomy that you see in books is the anatomy that we can make with a knife. And I think the idea of a muscle running from its origin to insertion, like the biceps goes from the coracoid process and the supraglenoid tubercle down to the radial tuberosity, and therefore it does. What we do is we take off every other muscle from the body. We leave the biceps there, and we say, well, what would this biceps do if it was alone on the body? And then we say, okay, it's a supinator and an elbow flexor and some kind of mild shoulder diagonal flexor. And then we pat ourselves on the back and say, okay, now I know what a biceps is. But a biceps never, ever, ever, ever operates that way. It's attached to its neighbors. It has, so those attachments from muscle neighbor to muscle neighbor have an effect on how the arm works. It's connected by the Anatomy Trains model, which that's what it is a model. It's just another map. By the Anatomy Trains model, the biceps is part of a myofascial continuity that goes from your thumb to the third, fourth, and fifth ribs. So that's worth looking at. I really do think that the idea of a muscle is a big mistake we made when we decided to understand the body with a blade. It's understandable. People were hunting. They were taking apart animals with blades to get at the meat and to understand things, and we started taking humans apart. A blade is an easy way to go about it. But the idea that the muscle goes from here to here, I think we got off on the wrong track. I hate to tell everybody that. They probably spent hours trying to learn the muscles and their actions and their origins and insertions. But I don't emphasize that any much more in my anatomy classes because I don't think the body works that way. It's worth learning, and then it's worth forgetting.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to get to next of is it worth learning? And it sounds like you feel like it is in terms of just as a general understanding, but really, as you mentioned, the body doesn't work that way. So it can actually become a barrier to really understanding the body deeper if we get too caught up in this isolationist, this muscle does this and this muscle does that. But if you...
Very, very prevalent in the personal training industry that we have to stabilize the gluteus medius, or we have to do this to that muscle. That really comes out of a book understanding and not about a real in-the-body understanding. Because we haven't found any representation of the deltoid or the trapezius in your brain. Your brain doesn't think that way. Your brain thinks in terms of individual neuromotor units, and there might be 200 individual neuromotor units in your trapezius, and so you fire off the individual neuromotor units that worked before when you tried to do the motion that you're about to do. So of course there's an opportunity for learning in there. But what I'm trying to get to is that there is our brain doesn't think in terms of muscles. Our body doesn't act in terms of individual muscles, but we've organized our anatomy books in terms of individual muscles, and that's gotten us down the wrong track. I don't expect that I'm going to be able to overturn that with, obviously it's a very useful metaphor, the origins and insertions in the action, and we've learned a lot from that metaphor, but I don't think it's actually the way the body works. And I think we're on the edge of a revolution that will understand it differently. And I think that new understanding will be much better for yoga, because I don't think the individual origin and insertion anatomy has been very useful for yoga teachers.
And so then do we stick with the myofascial meridians, the things that you've discovered and worked with so much that's in your book? Is that kind of the next evolution of this understanding, or is there something more with all of that?
Oh, Ashton, you're so kind to give me that credit, but I think I'm just another white man cutting up the body in a different way. So if you get value out of the Anatomy Transmat, by all means. And it's been quite good for yoga, because if you go into downward dog, it's not just your hamstrings that you're stretching or your Achilles tendon that you're stretching. You're stretching a line that runs from the underside of your toes all the way around to your nose. And I can demonstrate that quite easily by putting somebody into downward dog and just having them first look forward and then look at their own navel and feel how the stretch changes. Supposedly you're not doing anything with your hips when you're just flexing and extending your head, but you will find that the feeling changes all the way down, however far you feel it, but you can easily feel it into the hamstrings and the lower leg. So yes, I think the Anatomy Trains is a useful way to study it. But I'm not sure that there aren't going to be more useful ways to think about this in the future. We really only have one muscle. We have one mind, we have one muscle. It's just in 600 fascial pockets. So it's worth learning the 600 fascial pockets, but it's not worth getting suckered into the idea that the body actually works pocket to pocket to pocket. It's working as a whole. It learns as a whole. It functions as a whole. And also, when you're talking about injuries, it fails as a whole. Our whole physiotherapy thing is based on, your supraspinatus tendon failed, and therefore we must do something to strengthen your supraspinatus or repair your supraspinatus tendon. When in fact, we should be saying, okay, how come all the forces ended up at that supraspinatus tendon? That's probably happening somewhere else. And that's what I would call people to do with the Anatomy Trains theory or whatever map that they tend to use. It's not why did this injury happen, but why isn't this injury clearing up? What is stopping this injury from healing? It is unfortunately true that there are injuries in the yoga world. Injuries happen in yoga classes. And whoever is healing that, whether it's the teacher or a physiotherapist or a massage therapist or whoever's tackling that, needs to understand that it's not a problem, it's a pattern. So I'm interested in seeing the patterns, and then there's where I think the Anatomy Trains is quite helpful to see the patterns of the musculature. But again, it's only one map, it's not the map.
Well, and the patterns brings up a couple things. One, it's one of those things when people ask me like, I've got this thing going on or this issue going on. I'm like, okay, well, let me see you move. Like, I need to see you move before I can really make any type of assessment of what's going on. But you actually introduced a word into my vocabulary that I'd like to discuss a little bit here too, and that's kinesthetic literacy. And I think it's relevant to where we are in the conversation. Can you describe what kinesthetic literacy is and why it's so important?
Yes, I think we have really pretty well established IQ, and you can argue how we test it, but there certainly is an intelligence quotient in terms of people's ability to use their nervous system in logical and thoughtful ways. And through Daniel Goleman and the work of the women in the world, we're beginning to learn about emotional EQ, your emotional quotient, your emotional intelligence, and we're beginning to understand. We're having a great object lesson right now in our national experience of how much emotional intelligence is important. But it is going across the world to give this emotional intelligence. But physical intelligence, KQ, is something that we really haven't mapped the topology of yet. And we ought to make sure that our children are coming out with a kind of kinesthetic literacy, a literacy about their own body and their own body feelings and how their own body works, which is not something that we are doing in the educational system, really not. We are forcing kids to sit at desks all day. We are limiting their motions outside. After Megan's Law, kids don't run around outside very much. They're kind of under protective house arrest. And then you put on top of that almost everything is happening online now, so that the kids' focal lengths are often at about 30 to 40 centimeters looking at a screen. I won't go through that familiar litany that we're all familiar with. But physical things are being taken out of school. Music is a physical skill, and there isn't enough money for music in school, and you can't test it on the Common Core, so it tends to drop away. Dance is a physical skill. that has been taught to children time immemorial. And more, I see more and more kids now who haven't been through folk dances, who don't know how to square dance or whatever the local dance in their culture would be. And art is a physical skill. Again, the budget for art is going way down. The one place where you have a budget for physical skill is in sports, and that's only for the people who are good. I got into bodywork. I got into this whole thing because I was the awkward kid. And being the awkward kid, you struck out in baseball, and there wasn't any training because you were the awkward kid. You were always going to be the sort of last one on the team, and that the shame of that personal experience has kind of motivated me through the life. I would like to see and let me just finish that story. I discovered at 25 years old that I have incredible kinesthetic intelligence in my hand. Not incredible compared to other people, but certainly something that I would never have used if I hadn't come across Eiderolf massage and things like that. That intelligence was put to better use than I was putting it to before. And I would love to see that every child not only has their IQ tested and not only has their EQ tested by their social skills in the school, but that we examine their physicality and see what they can do. And there again, I'm coming back to yoga. Yoga has done a great deal to expand physicality in the Western world over the last 40 years. Yoga was not available. Ida Rolf got into yoga in 1922. Well, it wasn't like there was yoga available at your corner store or the local spa or anything like that. Yoga was, even when I was young in the 50s, was totally unheard of and rare and off. What are you talking about when you're talking about yoga? Now everybody knows yoga and Pilates and the other things that have come along. So yoga has done a great service for that, and I'm very interested in seeing the yoga community take its rightful place at the table, as I said, as part of this idea of producing kinesthetic literacy. So if you were going to say what somebody was for being literate in the English language, you'd say, well, you need to read Shakespeare, and you need to read these books of the Bible, and you need to read Samuel Beckett or whoever you think we need to read to be literate. So can we do something similar with movement and say you really ought to be able to kiss your own knees? That's part of your hips working, and you ought to be able to get in and out of a chair so slowly that you are conscious of the movement from bottom to top, because we all use chairs and we all use them badly. And some of the chairs that we're forced to sit in, I just came back on a 7-hour flight. Those aren't chairs that are made for human beings. Those are chairs that are made for sardines. And so I construct, I get in there, I grab everybody else's pillow and blankets and construct myself an orthopedic chair for the 7 hours that I'm going to be on the plane. But we really just don't teach people how to use their bodies intelligently, and that's what I'm talking about with kinesthetic literacy.
Now, I think tied into that is you have some really wonderful ideas that are similar to some of the yoga teachers I've had over the years about awareness in disease. And I think it kind of leads into this kinesthetic literacy and our ability to feel into places into our body. And I was wondering if we could dive down that rabbit hole a little bit and just get a sense of some of your thoughts around how disease is able to take hold and then spread in areas where there is no awareness, where we've just lost the literacy of that area of the body and understanding how to move it, how to feel it, and everything else. Could you speak to that a little bit, please?
Sure. Your nervous system is putting lots and lots of feelers into your fascia. There are no motor nerves to go to the fascia. You can't voluntarily contract fascia. You can voluntarily contract the muscle, and the muscle works on the fascia, but you can't voluntarily contract the fascia. However, there's tons and tons and tons of sensory nerves in the fascia. There's probably 6 times as many nerves in the fascia than there are in the muscles. So we say, well, we're going to stretch our muscles in yoga. You're actually, in terms of your nervous system, you've got about 6 times as many sensors in your fascia as you do in your muscles. So you're really sensing your fascia a lot from minute to minute. You don't do that in an aware kind of way. It's in your subconscious awareness for the most part, unless it's nagging at you. But during the time that you're sitting here listening to me, you're probably every once in a while shifting in your chair. You're doing that because the tissues you're sitting on are getting all the water pushed out of them and they're complaining. You don't register it as pain. It actually does come up the nociceptive tracts. It comes up the pain pathways, but you just shift your butt so that another piece of tissue is being squished, and the one that was being squished is going to get water again. So I have what I call number 1, number 2, and number 3 areas. So the number 1 areas are the areas that I could easily use in my movement. So everything right out in front of my arms, I can put my arms anywhere in front of my body, from above my eyes to below my hands. But if you ask me to do, I'm sorry, which one is it where you put your hands behind you and grasp your hands behind your shoulder blades? Is that cow?
Cows when we're doing the flexion extension of the spine on all fours. But I know what you're talking about, where you're clasping the hands behind, usually do a forward fold or something to that effect.
Right. And so one elbow is up and one elbow is down.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about cow face pose. I gotcha.
Okay, cow face pose. And so if I were to do that, I can put my hands on my back easily. I can, with a little stretch, interlock my fingers. So with that little stretch, that's going to go into number 2 areas. Number 2 areas are areas that I wouldn't use normally, but if you give me a directive, I can stretch into those. And those are the areas that we work in yoga, are the number 2 areas, right? We also have these number 3 areas in the body, and those are the areas that we never move. Obviously, they move through space, but they don't move relative to each other, so they don't stimulate those nerve endings in the fascia, so they don't get represented on your brain. And if they're not represented in your brain, you can't organize a movement. If you can't feel it, you can't move it. That's not just a good idea. It's a law of the nervous system. So we have to get in there. That's what yoga does, is force me to feel areas that I haven't been feeling, and therefore they start to get registered on my brain, and therefore I can start to organize movement in them. And these number 3 areas become number 2 areas, and number 2 areas then become the familiar number 1 areas that I can move into. So, if I were to put my hand over my head and to try to put my foot in it, if I actually achieved putting my foot in it, I would be in the hospital. I would be tearing tissues that I haven't moved in too many years, that are number 3 areas down in my adductors. With some practice, I might be able to get close to that. But a dancer, that's a number 1 area. I just had a dancer in one of my classes, and she was doing that in the back of the room. It was very disconcerting. She would be standing there on one leg with her other leg and her other foot in her hand over her head. This was clearly just absolutely open, easy, what I would call number 1 movement for her. It would be put me in the hospital movement for me at my age and at my degree of agility. So we're in this kind of idea of kinesthetic literacy. We would like to have children be as aware of their bodies as they can. I would say that you make better decisions when you make them with your whole body. So I think this reflects into our mental and our emotional health as well. But it also reflects into the physical health, which is the question that you asked me. And to get back to that question, I'm going to go to the 16th century Dr. Paracelsus. And he said, there is but one disease, and its name is congestion. So those areas that you don't move, since they don't move, they don't get the water exchanged in them. When they don't get the water exchanged in them, things get sticky, kind of like gluten, kind of like sugar, but things get sticky. And then that is the site at which disease can get started. So there is a relationship between your movement and disease. Not all diseases, some are inherited, some are agents from the outside. But the diseases, a lot of lifestyle diseases, a lot of heart disease is simply because we're not moving enough. So we lose literal contact with these different parts of our body. And that's why I love the yoga set of postures. It's very well designed to get you into the lost parts of your body and to do it in a progressive way. I also think there's value. I think there's value in Pilates. I think there's value in personal training. I think there's value in a lot of these systems. And I think we're trying to develop a yoga for the 21st century. But I'm not sure it's going to look like the yoga of the 18th century and all those poses that we inherited from the earlier teachers. Those are obviously very valuable things, but they were developed for an agricultural society. They were developed for the Brahmin class. If we look at the yoga that's going to work, or the kind of physical, let me just generalize it by saying we're looking for a physical education that is going to work for our electronic children. We've had systems, the yoga system that we've learned was developed for an agrarian society. Since we've moved into an industrial society, and now we're moving on into an electronic society, what is the yoga that is going to work for an electronic society? I'm not at all sure that it's the same yoga that would work for an agricultural society. So I'm sure we need a yoga, but I'm not sure which yoga we're going to end up with, because society is changing very, very fast. But I do know that most of the physical education systems that we have are very industrial, very, very much look at the body as a machine. And we need to look at the body as a flower. We need to look at the body as a thought. We need to look at the body as a program. We need different images for the body, not just the heart is a pump, the lung is a bellows, the brain is a computer, the liver is a factory, the kidney is a filter. We have all these very industrial images that we use on the body. We need to expand that out. If we're going to help our kids out, we need to understand that.
Well, I've heard you speak before, and it's definitely influenced the way that I think about yoga as well. But this idea that some people get a little caught up in the idea that yoga needs to hold on to its ancient roots, which I agree as a generality, but people they poo-poo this idea that, well, new postures are coming out and someone just invented this or something like that, where the idea is that, yes, good, because we need yoga, or at least the physical practice of yoga, to evolve to suit the needs of the people now that it's addressing, as you said, where it's coming from a different culture where the physical needs at the very least were much different than they are now. So we have to start evolving the way the physical practice is so that it actually can really speak to people now.
I think that both are valuable. You don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I have been impressed with things that I learned from Ida Rolf that at the time I poo-pooed, and now 40 years later I understand why she was saying it, and I'm very glad that I didn't throw out that baby with the bathwater. At the same time, and Pilates said something similar to this, they grew up in the 40s, or they grew up in the teens and were promoting in the 40s, that you could change somebody from gay to straight by giving them a proper series of Rolfing sessions. Well, I think that's an idea that we would choose to reject, and that Pilates had a bunch of ideas we would choose to reject. Now, that doesn't mean reject their whole work. Now, the same thing is going to go for Patanjali or Krishnamacharya. They were working in a small situation in India, which how can we expect that that's going to apply? And we remember that Krishnamacharya had 3 students. I just went to a power yoga class down in Boston that had 90 students in it. Well, don't tell me that's personal care. 90 students in the classroom. It was an amazing class. I loved the class, but that's a very, very, very different situation than the classes that were going on in India. So it's not an easy task to know what is the baby, what is valuable, and what needs to be changed to fit with contemporary things. So I think it's really great that we have both. I cannot join in the chorus where one yoga thing is saying, oh, well, they've got it wrong and they shouldn't be doing it that way and they should be doing it our way. I just don't go with that. I think we need lots of different kinds of yoga for lots of different kinds of people, that we need yoga for kids, we need yoga for old people, we need yoga in rehab, surgical rehab, as well as physio outpatient rehab. We need yoga as sports prep. We need yoga as relaxation for the kids who are forced to sit at desks all day. We need counter computer yoga. And I'm really glad to see that there are lots of different kinds, from very athletic yoga. And I wouldn't choose to take the class that goes on in my local gym that has a very sort of cut and dried kind of athletic thing to it. I prefer a more meditative form, but I think we really just ought to allow room for all different kinds and let the kids sort out which one is suited to them.
Awesome. So you mentioned a while back, you brought up pain, and I'm wanting to talk a little bit about it in terms of how the human perception of pain differs from other animals or specifically other mammals, and how that relates to some of the stuff around kinesthetic literacy and what we're talking about with movement and feeling.
Well, I don't know, man. You got a good set of sleeves on there. I imagine you took some pain in getting that artwork down your arms.
Definitely.
What was your relationship to that pain?
Well, I mean, my personal relationship was that it's not fun. I don't like getting tattoos, but I like what happens afterwards. But I've heard you describe in terms of the pain actually being the difference between the sensation itself and the repulsion of the sensation, and that being kind of a key difference between what we could say is just sensation or pain itself, and how that's actually informs our response to the experience.
Yeah, the International Association for the Study of Pain has a definition of pain that I really don't like. It's very subjective and just plain. I like the definition that I got from Ida Rolf a whole lot better. And it's very simple. Pain is sensation accompanied by the motor intention to withdraw. Pain is sensation, but it's sensation when it's accompanied by you're trying to get away from it. So if you're not trying to get away from it, it's sensation. If you're trying to get away from it, it's pain. And when I see people going into yoga poses and they are in this kind of no pain, no gain thing, it's the same with rollers. People are on these foam rollers and it must be working because it hurts like hell. No, it just hurts like hell. It's not really doing that much. I'm not averse to causing pain in therapy, but I want it to be the pain of the pain leaving the body, not pain being put into the body. And I get into trouble with the pain people who want to say, oh no, pain isn't in the body. Pain is all in the central nervous system. So, well, okay, pain's all in the central nervous system. When I itch, it's in the central nervous system too, but I don't scratch my brain, I scratch my arm and it solves the problem in my central nervous system. So it's the same with pain in the body. It may be actually in the central nervous system, but touching the body or moving the body can help release it. But pain is such it's a freight-loaded word with so many meanings and levels of meaning to it that I'm in the middle of psychic pain because I buried my mother in the last 6 months. I'm still in the period of grieving her loss. And I wouldn't trade that pain for anything. It's a measure of my relationship with her. It's a measure of my changing relationship with her. My relationship with her has not ended because she ended, but it's changed and it continues to change. And so that's a word that I would call pain, but it's something that is healing and welcome and meaningful. I hate meaningless pain. For you, the pain of the tattoos is associated with the meaning of having that picture on your arm when you're done. And therefore, you welcome it in a way. You're not trying to get away from it. Or it would be a very bad picture if you were constantly trying to get away. They wouldn't do such a good job of inking. So commonly when I start working with people, and the parallel with yoga is very much, you see people come into a yoga class and they rebel against the pain when they first come across it, but then they begin to associate that sort of sweet sensation of stretching with the increased motion and the increased well-being that they have, and then they start to welcome that pain. And then it's not pain anymore, it's just sensation, because it's not accompanied by that motor intention to withdraw. And the same thing happens to people who are coming from my deep bodywork sessions. What they might experience as, wow, what are you doing? As a kind of painful thing in the first session. And then they take a breath and they say, oh, God, that's so much freer. And they begin to associate my touch, the depth of the touch, even the sensation that goes along with the depth of my touch with what's going to happen afterwards. And it stops being pain and simply becomes part of their sensorium. So That I think works on both psychological and emotional levels of if you can accept what life is giving you and not try to withdraw from it, it ceases to be painful. It can be sensationful, but it ceases to be painful.
If you could impart one piece of knowledge on people, what would that be? Like if you take the culmination of your work and just say, okay, if you're going to get one thing from this, what would that thing be?
Movement matters. Movement. If we're going to do just one thing, then it's movement matters. We know from research that movement organizes fascia. We know from research that movement pushes the fluids around the body and therefore renews the body. And we know that movement takes you up into the sympathetic side of your autonomic nervous system, and then the body automatically goes down to the parasympathetic side, and the parasympathetic side is where repose, repair, restoration happens. So if you don't move, you don't go very far into the sympathetic, so you don't go very far into the parasympathetic, so you don't get a lot of repose and repair, and the body starts to break down with that stress. So I see a sedentary crisis out there, an inactivity crisis, and I hope that this will be solved by virtual reality, that you'll actually physically be playing tennis in a virtual reality world, so that you actually will swing your arm and you'll feel your feet on the ground and you'll actually have to coordinate the body. At the moment, the video games only require eye-hand coordination and don't require much of the rest of your body. I think that's a temporary thing, in that the games are in such a primitive form right now, and they'll get much more participatory as time goes on. But I just really hope that we won't go down the rabbit hole of only using our brains and not using our bodies, because the intuition in our bodies, the gut feelings and the hunches and those feelings that come over you, that are signals coming up from your body, are just tremendously valuable. They've been honed over millions of years of being both hunter and prey, and we lose those instincts at our peril.
Well, and so for anyone listening to this podcast, so long as they're not driving or operating heavy machinery, get up and move and start moving as you're still listening, because I love that. Movement matters.
The evidence is really quite, Ashton, it's really not that bad. A couple of minutes an hour. It's just people get in, I'm the same way. I'm driving home. It's from New York. It's 5 hours. I really want to get home. I'm just going to put the pedal to the metal and get there. But if you stop every hour and walk for 5 minutes, you will obviate a lot of the health problems that come from that inactivity. 5 minutes an hour is enough. We do know that indigenous cultures moved a great deal more than we do. It's evident in their bones. It's evident in physiological measures that they've been able to take, and the study of indigenous cultures who is still existing in Africa and Asia, and counting the number of steps they take in a day and the amount of movement that they do in a day. We're full of labor-saving devices. Well, we've saved so much labor that our body isn't getting the requisite amount of movement, which leads to this idea of kinesthetic literacy. We're becoming kinesthetically illiterate, and we'd better start thinking about this. And it's the first time in history that we've really had to think about this, because in a hunter-gatherer society, you either moved or you died. And in an agricultural society, everybody was expected to get out there and swing the scythe in the fields and bend over and plant the seeds. And, there was plenty of activity when we were either a hunter-gatherer society or an agricultural society. But with the industrial society, the amount of activity started to go down. It got more repetitive. And with an electronic society, the need for movement is just minimized. And so we have to take it in hand ourselves consciously. And yoga is absolutely a part of that.
Well, I love it. Move more. It's as simple as that. And I love, whether it's yoga, whether it's getting up and walking, whatever it may be. As you said, it's obviously very important for us to be doing regularly and often. Tom, where can people find out more about your work? You've got your website, your book, you've got plenty of courses. Tell us a little bit about the best ways to connect with you and the work that you do.
Great. Thanks. Well, we're around worldwide. So there's anatomytrains.com, which is the mothership site, but we've also got .co.uk for our offerings in Europe, and .com AUS for Australia, all reachable from our site. And we do offer lots of short courses. Some of them are specifically for manual therapists, and some of them are for movement therapists, including yoga teachers. And I am just actually next week beginning to record an anatomy class for yoga teachers, well, for anybody in yoga, but these yoga teacher trainings. So that I hope that within the near future, we'll have a specific online course to help people carry some of these ideas into the specifics. And I just think this is really important. Sorry, I'm stopping advertising myself, but I just...
No, this is, please.
I don't care whose course you take, whether you take my course or Leslie Kamenov offers a course or other people offer her courses. These are all good things because yoga teacher training is a young industry. So we only have a few hours devoted to the sciences in these yoga teacher trainings. And I think they're doing a great job of putting out yoga teachers. That's great. But we need yoga teachers who can talk their walk, who not only know, not everybody needs to do this. It's great to have wonderful intuitive teachers who can't really speak about what they're doing, but we're going to need people in the yoga community who can speak to the physiotherapy community, who can speak to the medical community, who can speak to the physical education community, so that yoga can be included in all the places where yoga should be included. And so I'm urging those people who have that interest. I'm a nerd for it. I got really interested in it, the whole anthropology and evolution of it, to understand how your limbs came out of the fish body. And if you look at your lungs in your face, you can see that the hard part of the gills came up to form your face, and the soft part of the gills dropped down into your chest to form your lungs. These kinds of things are absolutely fascinating and nerdy to me, and I get off on them researching them out. I don't expect everybody to get that way, but we should all be conversant with the names of the bones and the muscles and the bony protuberances and all the sticky outy bits, so that we can speak the language that everybody else is speaking here. That doesn't mean that we have to believe all their ideas about anatomy, as we spoke at the beginning of our conversation, but it does mean that we are able to speak to our compadres so that we get the respect we deserve.
Well, and I'm really looking forward to whenever that anatomy course does come out. I've taken a number of your courses online. I've got an older second edition of your book. I know the third edition has now come out as well, and I really, really recommend that for anyone, period, but in particular for manual therapists and for body workers, yoga teachers in particular. Your insights really provide some amazing directions and places to go for yoga teachers. So I can't recommend your work enough. So don't worry about advertising. I'll advertise for you too. I think you're awesome, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing out there.
Thanks very much. I'm going to put in one more thing, Ashton, if I might, which is the third edition of the book gives you not only the most updated stuff that we've been doing with gait and fascial fitness, how fascia gets trained by yoga and by athletic activity. We've put that in the new edition. But the new edition also gives you access to a website that has about 10 hours of video on it, including some of those webinars. And we have found that our video webinars have been very popular with people because they can do it any time they like. And so those are all on the site, or you get access to much of it from just buying the book. And the book is organized. The book is written up. I wrote the book so that medical people would understand that we had something to say. But so a lot of people don't read drop in to read parts of the book here and there. But the book is designed so that you can get the story from doing the pictures and the captions, or just even riffling your way through the book. You can get the general concept. And then if there's something you more specifically want to go down into, you can go there.
Awesome. Well, yeah, it's a dense book in terms of its vocab and its knowledge, but as you said, it's an amazing, it's tough to get cover to cover straight off the bat, but it's amazing as a resource. I constantly find myself diving back into it, so I can definitely attest to that. It's, if you're a yoga teacher or body worker, it's definitely a book to have, because it will change very likely change a lot of long-held notions about the body and give some really amazing insights. So I'll have to check out the 3rd edition now.
I was an English major at the beginning, so vocabulary is one of my hobbies. But as I say, the design of the book, I hope, it allows people to dip in where they want to and just take the story from the pictures where not. But I can't help writing a dense book, dense in a person.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate your insights. I really appreciate the work that you do out there in the world. So thank you for coming on today and sharing your passions with us.
Oh, Ashton, it was a pleasure to talk with you and your audience, and good luck to you.
Thank you. And for all of our listeners out there, I hope you've enjoyed our chat today. I'm certain you've learned something new, and I hope you all have a very present moment. Thanks for listening. Namaste. Hey everybody, it's Ashton here with an announcement. We're starting a weekly contest giveaway over at Savannah Spirit. If you'd like to enter into the contest to win one of our weekly prizes, go to savannahspirit.com/contest. If you enjoyed listening to the podcast today, we'd really appreciate it if you went over to iTunes, left us a review, leave us some comments, and share this podcast with anyone who you think might enjoy it. Also want to invite you to go check out Savannah East, which is the name of our blog and also the name of a Facebook group where I interact with guests and our audience. We'll post recent episodes up there as well as interesting articles relating to our guests and or the topics on the shows. And again, thank you so much for listening. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaheast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.